I usually come to this cafe at the same time every morning, the one tucked between the laundromat and the little stationery shop. There's nothing special about it, except for the barista with the gray streak in her hair who always manages to make me feel like she notices me without actually saying it. I've been coming for 3 weeks now. I know my routine: dark roast, no sugar, oat milk if they have it, a muffin if it's Tuesday. And yet, every morning I catch myself hesitating at the door, pretending I forgot my phone, just to watch her move behind the counter. She doesn't smile like she's trying to charm anyone. It's softer than that, like she's amused that life keeps asking her questions she already knows the answer to. "Morning," she says today, not looking up at first, then flicking her eyes to mine. "The usual?" I nod. My words get stuck somewhere between the door and my throat. There's a pause, just long enough for me to wonder if she noticed. She doesn't say anything, just lifts the coffee cup from the warmer and sets it in front of me with a quiet precision that feels like a secret handshake. I watch her hands. They're not flashy or manicured, just the hands of someone who does a lot of small, exact movements. I want to memorize that. There's a tension in her shoulders that isn't fatigue, more like she's carrying thoughts I can't see, but somehow I feel the weight of them anyway. I sit in my usual seat near the window. She comes by later to clear a napkin I hadn't used, and I notice she pauses for a fraction of a second, tilts her head like she's deciding if I should matter today. My chest tightens. I fold my own napkin the way I imagine she might, careful, deliberate. Sometimes, I imagine I could say something, ask her a question that would make her laugh. Something ordinary. But then I remember she has her life, her mornings before mine, and I retreat into my phone, scrolling through messages I'll never send. Earlier this week, she made a joke about someone leaving a sock in the laundry next door. It was quiet, almost accidental. But I laughed, and she laughed too, the kind of laugh that lingers just a moment too long. I felt, for that instant, like I existed in her world in a way I rarely do anywhere else. She brings the coffee over again. Our hands brush for a heartbeat, accidental, and I almost say something, my name, or a question, or even just, thanks. Instead, I let my fingers linger near the cup, noticing the warmth through the ceramic. I take a sip and notice a small crease by her eye that wasn't there yesterday. Maybe I'm imagining it. I want to tell her she's beautiful, but the words stick to the roof of my mouth. I settle for a quiet smile, and she nods once, like she's agreeing with a thought we both can't voice. When I finally leave, she doesn't wave or call after me. I glance over my shoulder and catch her looking, just for a moment. That look, brief as it is, wraps around me in a way her arms never have. And then my phone buzzes in my pocket. An unknown number. A text: "Did you find the sock yet?" I pause at the corner, the sound of the city muted around me, and for a moment, I can't decide if I'm more curious or terrified to reply. The next morning, I showed up earlier than usual. Part of me wanted to pretend I was just passing by, but my feet had other plans. She was behind the counter, stacking mugs, humming something I couldn't place. "Hey," I said, softly. Not enough to startle her, just enough to let her know I existed. "Hey," she replied, and I noticed the slight pause, like she had been mid-thought and hadn't expected to see me. I ordered the same as yesterday, and she nodded. For a moment, she looked at the corner of the cafe, lost in thought. Then she laughed quietly. "My son left this huge pile of bills on the table last night." I felt like I was drowning in paper. I didn't know what to say. It was nothing, a simple confession, but it made her human in a way that staring from across the counter never could. I get that," I muttered. I didn't, really. But I hoped she'd feel like I did. She poured the coffee and set it in front of me, lingering just long enough that I caught a whiff of her perfume. Something warm, faintly cinnamon. I pretended to be absorbed in my cup, but my eyes kept flicking up. I wanted to ask more, about the bills, her son, her life, but a voice inside me said it wasn't my place. Not yet. There was the age gap, the differences in everything, experience, freedom, obligations. And still, I felt drawn to her, a quiet magnet pulling at something in my chest I hadn't named. She sat down across from me for a moment, just to balance the milk jug. Her chair scraped lightly against the floor. "You ever feel like life's just repetitive?" she asked, more to herself than me. "Yeah," I said, surprised that my voice came out steady. "Sometimes I think I'm waiting for, I don't know, something to change." She looked at me then, really looked, for a beat longer than necessary. "I know that feeling." A silence followed. Not awkward, exactly, more like the kind of silence where words feel too clumsy to touch the space between you. We sipped our coffee, and I noticed the way her hand lingered near mine as she reached for the sugar. I imagined scenarios I shouldn't, what it would feel like if she leaned a little closer, or smiled in a way that belonged only to me. And I pushed them away instantly, guilt washing over me. She stood to clear the table, brushing past me. Her shoulder grazed mine, a fleeting touch, and I felt a warmth spread that had nothing to do with the coffee. I wanted to hold that moment, fold it into something permanent. But instead, I just let my hand hover near the napkin she had dropped. Before leaving, she glanced at me, soft and brief, like she'd been weighing something unsaid. "See you tomorrow?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure what agreeing meant. Walking home, I thought about that touch, that fleeting glance. I don't know why that moment stayed with me, maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me that it was raining lightly the next day. I didn't plan to linger, but the cafe had that quiet smell of wet umbrellas and warm wood that made me stay a little longer. She was behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, damp hair tucked behind one ear. "Coffee?" she asked, voice lower than usual. She didn't look up until I'd already stepped inside. "Yeah," I said, fumbling for my wallet. My fingers lingered over the bills, brushing against the edge like I was afraid she'd notice. She poured my drink, and for a second our hands brushed. I almost said something, almost. Instead, I cleared my throat, looked out the window, and pretended to be absorbed in the raindrops racing down the glass. She shifted behind the counter, humming softly, then paused. "Didn't see you yesterday," she said, and I felt a strange pang. She was noting my absence, but there was something else in her tone, caution, maybe. "Had stuff," I muttered. The words were thin, inadequate. My chest tightened when I realized she didn't press, didn't ask. She just set the coffee down, fingers brushing mine again, fleeting. I watched her. Really watched her. The way she wiped the counter, the tilt of her shoulders, the soft crease at the corner of her eyes. And somewhere in that quiet, I imagined what it would feel like to touch her, just once, deliberately. The thought made me bite my lip. A kid ran in, maybe 8 or 9, and called her Mom. She smiled, brisk, professional, but not without warmth. I felt the line between us snap into place, the reminder that I was outside that circle, always. I sipped my coffee, pretending to read a receipt. But I noticed the small gestures, the way she shook out a towel, the careful way she moved around the counter so she wouldn't bump into me. Every motion spoke in half words, small silences. She paused near my table, reaching for a cup. Our eyes met. Something unspoken hovered in the air. I leaned slightly forward, almost forgetting the child's presence. Her gaze flicked to the little hands tugging at her apron, and she stepped back. "Sorry," she said, almost too quickly. A shrug. Her hand lingered near mine, then retracted. I wanted to say something, anything. Something that might bridge the distance. But the words stuck, tangled in the quiet tension, leaving only a faint hum in the room. She turned, moving toward the kitchen. I remained frozen, a breath away from following her, from stepping into a space I wasn't supposed to occupy. The rain tapped against the window. I sipped again, pretending nothing happened. But my fingers still tingled where hers had passed. Later, she appeared at the counter again, drying her hands. Our eyes met, longer this time. The air between us held a question neither of us would speak. I leaned slightly, almost, and then she stepped back, the briefest smile hovering on her lips. A near kiss. A half confession. Not a word exchanged, but everything said that it was late afternoon. The cafe was nearly empty, sunlight slanting through the blinds in thin stripes across the floor. I'd stayed longer than usual, pretending to work on my laptop, but mostly I was watching her. She wiped tables slowly, humming low, and I noticed the crease between her eyebrows deepen ever so slightly. Something had shifted in her mood, subtle, but it pulled at me. "You staying long?" she asked, voice softer than usual. Not a question exactly, more like an invitation to say whatever I wanted, though I didn't know what that was. I closed my laptop, fingers lingering on the edge. I don't know. I almost added, "I don't want to leave," but the words died in my throat. She leaned on the counter, hands folded. "You're quiet today." Her eyes scanned me like she was trying to read a note she didn't have. I felt a sudden, sharp pang, jealousy, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the memory of her laughing with a customer earlier, the warmth she gave someone else that I wanted for myself. My chest tightened. I swallowed, pretending to look at my cup. "I'm sorry," I muttered, words meaningless even to me. "I just don't know why I feel like that." Her gaze softened, slow and careful, like she was trying not to break something fragile. "Like what?" I wanted to tell her everything, how I think about her when I shouldn't, how I imagine her smile in quiet moments, how her presence makes ordinary things feel different. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I nodded, a half gesture toward honesty, a half shield for fear. She walked past me to grab a cup from the shelf. Her hand brushed mine, lighter than usual, and I almost caught it. I didn't, afraid of what the action would mean. "Do you ever," she began, then stopped, tilting her head, like she was weighing a thought she might regret speaking. Her voice faded into the hum of the espresso machine. I wanted to finish her question, whatever it was, to say yes or no or something that would leave a trace. Instead, I just breathed. My fingers traced the edge of the cup. We sat at a small table by the window, the light falling across us in parallel stripes. I watched her stir her tea, slow, deliberate, and I noticed the tremor in her hands. Not from cold, I realized, but from holding herself together. "Sometimes," I said finally, voice low, hesitant. "Sometimes I feel like I shouldn't feel like this. But I do anyway." She didn't respond immediately. Just looked at me, soft, steady. A small pause stretched between us, the air thick with things neither of us had words for. Then she tilted her head, an almost imperceptible question in her eyes. And I wondered, do I take the next step, say the thing that could break or build everything? Or do I keep silent, keep this fragile calm intact? The cafe clock ticked. The world outside blurred in motion. And I realized, I couldn't leave without knowing if she felt it too that I came by the cafe the next morning, like usual. But she wasn't there. The smell of coffee, the low hum of the espresso machine, the quiet scrape of chairs, all familiar, all waiting, but her absence made it hollow. A note on the counter, in her handwriting, "Closed this morning. Sorry." I stared at it longer than I should have. My fingers traced the words like I could summon her back. But I didn't. I sat anyway, in my usual chair, nursing the warmth of a cup that wasn't hers. The next day, she was there, but something had shifted. The casual ease between us, the small jokes, the lingering glances, they'd disappeared. She moved faster, smiled less, kept her eyes on her tasks. The warmth I had grown into was replaced by a polite distance I didn't know how to breach. I kept my coffee ritual, trying not to notice her posture, the way her shoulders seemed to pull inward, or the faint tension in her jaw. I wanted to ask what happened, but the words caught in my throat. Later that week, I passed her on the street. She walked quickly, her son's hand in hers, and she didn't glance up. My chest tightened in a familiar ache, a silent "what if" lodged there. I wanted to call out, to wave, to break the invisible barrier she'd thrown up. I didn't. I imagined the reasons. Maybe she felt it too strongly, maybe she didn't, maybe she remembered a past that made this impossible. She hadn't said anything about a divorce, about her son, about the life that waited beyond the cafe walls. And now, the gap between us felt unbridgeable. I sent a text I couldn't press send. Are you okay? It stayed in the drafts folder, staring at me, the blinking cursor a quiet judge. I couldn't risk it, not the reply I might get, not the hope I might feel, not the heartbreak I might endure. Days passed. I kept my routine, showing up at the cafe, sitting in my corner, nursing coffees that no longer felt warm. The familiarity was there, but the connection had paused, like a record left on a groove that wouldn't move forward. Sometimes, I imagined her behind the counter, looking up and meeting my eyes like before. Sometimes, I imagined the opposite, a world where she'd vanished from the rhythm of my days entirely. Both thoughts twisted in me, quiet, relentless. The chair across from me stayed empty. The cup she usually carried didn't appear. The napkin she might have folded sat untouched. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. I left the cafe that evening without knocking, without saying a word. The rain tapped lightly on the windows, a quiet punctuation mark to the week that refused to move. And I wondered, as I walked home, if the next time I saw her would feel like a beginning or a question I'd never get answered. It was evening when I found her at the small park across from the cafe. The benches were empty, except for us, and the streetlights had just flickered on, casting long, quiet shadows. I hesitated at the edge of the path, unsure if I was allowed to approach, unsure if she'd even want me here. She sat on the bench, shoulders slumped, eyes fixed on the puddles reflecting the yellow glow. For a long moment, I just watched, letting the silence settle between us. The air was cool, faintly damp, and I felt the weight of everything we hadn't said pressing down. "Hey," I said finally, my voice low, careful. Not a greeting. Not a question. Just an acknowledgement of our shared space. She looked up slowly, blinking as if she'd been caught between thoughts. "Hey," she replied, softer than usual, almost fragile. I moved closer, hands in my pockets. I didn't mean to," I trailed off, realizing I didn't know how to finish the sentence. Not in words that mattered. She shook her head, a small, tired smile tugging at her lips. "No. You didn't." We sat like that for a while, letting the quiet stretch. I noticed the small gestures, her fingers tracing the seam of her coat, the faint tremor when she adjusted her scarf, the way her eyes kept returning to me even as if she were reluctant. I've been thinking," I said finally, the words hesitant, jagged, about the pause. About us. About this. She glanced at me, the hint of worry in her gaze. And I don't know if I'm supposed to be here. Or if I should," my words faltered. I swallowed. "But I wanted you to know I feel it. All of it." Her hands rested on the bench beside her. She didn't reach for mine, not yet. But she didn't pull away either. "I feel it too," she said quietly, almost to herself. I didn't know if I should. But I do. A pause. Not long, but long enough that I could feel the walls we'd both held up crumble a little. I wanted to reach, to bridge the gap, but I also knew how delicate the space was, how easily a wrong move could undo us. I shifted slightly closer. My hand brushed the edge of hers, faint, intentional. She didn't pull away. Not immediately. Not yet. "Okay," she said softly, finally, and the single word carried a weight that made me exhale in relief I didn't know I'd been holding. We sat there, not touching fully, not declaring anything aloud, just existing in the fragile, honest middle of it all. The puddles reflected our shapes, distorted but present, and for the first time in weeks, the pause felt like it might be over. I didn't know what would come next. But for now, her hand near mine, her quiet acknowledgement, was enough. The morning settled into a rhythm I hadn't dared hope for. I arrived at the cafe at 8:47 a.m., exactly, like clockwork, and she was there, usually wiping down a counter or arranging the sugar packets just so. Some days she smiled at me before I ordered, other days her attention was absorbed in the steaming cup she carried. I didn't need words, the small rituals were enough. We found ourselves on the same bench in the park sometimes, just after the morning rush. Black coffee in my hands, tea in hers, steam curling between us in fragile, tangible clouds. We didn't talk much, not about big things, not about fears or past regrets. We didn't have to. The silence was a conversation, shaped by familiarity, trust, and the quiet acknowledgement that we'd both arrived here carefully, deliberately. She once told me, almost in passing, that she liked to fold her napkins a certain way in cafes when she traveled. I remembered, and now she noticed when I did the same, a subtle nod across the table, a shared glance that needed no words. The small things became our language. Sometimes, life intervened. Her son, errands, the occasional missed coffee. I'd sit with my cup, sometimes cold, sometimes empty, and wait without complaint. And she noticed, always, in the tilt of her head, the way her eyes softened when she found me still there. We weren't perfect. There were moments of hesitation, of half-words, of thoughts better left unspoken. But there was honesty now, and patience, and a sense of grounding neither of us had expected to feel. I caught her off guard one afternoon, reaching for my cup as I did the same for hers, and our hands brushed lightly. No sparks, no drama, just a quiet recognition. We were here, together, in a way that mattered. The cafe smells, the slant of morning sunlight through blinds, the low hum of the city, they all became markers of life as it was, gentle and deliberate. We carried our own history in those small details, a missed call months ago, a damp umbrella, the first tentative brush of hands on a rainy day. One evening, we walked past the park bench where it had all shifted between us. I sat for a moment, tracing the worn wood with my fingertips. She joined me, her teacup in hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I felt the weight of everything that had been, everything we had held, fold into something warm and simple. And I realized, finally, that this, the waiting, the small gestures, the quiet acknowledgement, was enough. Not perfect, not explosive, just real. I sipped my coffee and watched her stir her tea, and thought, only she would understand why I fold the napkin twice, not once. The world kept moving around us, unhurried, indifferent. But for now, we were present, together, in the spaces we'd claimed for ourselves. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?